Hello and welcome to another CalmCast reading. Today we are going to be reading Black Beauty by Anna Sewell. So without further ado, my early home. The first place that I can well remember was a large, pleasant meadow with a pond of clear water in it. Some shady trees leaned over it, and rushes and water lilies grew at the deep end. Over the hedge on the one side, we looked into a plowed field, and on the other, we looked over a gate at our master's house, which stood by the roadside. At the top of the meadow was a grove of fir trees, and at the bottom a running brook overhung by a steep bank. While I was young, I lived upon my mother's milk, as I could not eat grass. In the daytime, I ran by her side, and at night I lay down close by her. When it was hot, we used to stand by the pond in the shade of the trees, and when it was cold, we had a nice warm shed near the fir trees. As soon as I was old enough to eat grass, my mother used to go out to work in the daytime and come back in the evening. There were 6 young colts in the meadow beside me. I used to run with them, and we had great fun. We used to gallop all together round and round the field, as hard as we could go. Sometimes we had rather rough play, for they would often kick and bite as well as play. One day, when there was a great deal of kicking, my mother whined to me to come to her, and then she said, "I wish you to pay attention to what I'm going to say to you. The colts who live here are very good colts, but they have not learned manners. You have been well bred, and your father has a great name in these parts. Your grandfather won the cup 2 years at the Newmarket races. Your grandmother had the sweetest temper of any horse I ever knew, and I think you have never seen me kick or bite. I hope you will grow up gentle and good, and never learn bad ways. Do your work with a good will, lift your feet up well while you trot, and never kick or bite, even in play." I have never forgotten my mother's advice. I knew she was a wise old horse, and our master thought a great deal of her. Her name was Duchess, but he often called her Pet. Our master was a good, kind man. He gave us good food, good lodging, and kind words. We were all fond of him, and my mother loved him very much. When she saw him at the gate, she would neigh for joy and trot up to him. He would pat and stroke her, and then he would give me a piece of bread, which was very good, and sometimes he brought a carrot for my mother. All the horses would come to him, but I think we were his favorites. I was 2 years old when something happened which I have never forgotten. It was early in the spring. There had been a frost in the night, and a light mist still hung over the meadows. I and the other colts were feeding at the lower part of the field when we heard, off in the distance, a cry of dogs. The oldest of the colts raised his head, pricked up his ears, and said, "There are the hounds." He immediately cantered off, followed by the rest of us, to the upper part of the field, where we could look over the hedge and see several fields beyond. My mother was standing near, and seemed to know all about it. "They have found a hare," said my mother, "and if they come this way we shall see the hunt." And soon the dogs were tearing down the field of young wheat next to ours. I never heard such a noise as they made. They did not bark, but kept on a yo, 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 at the top of their voices. After them came a number of men on horseback, some of them in green coats, all galloping as fast as they could. They made straight for our meadow, where the high bank and hedge overhang the brook. "Now we shall see the hare," said my mother, and just then a hare, wild with fright, rushed by, and made for the trees. On came the dogs. They burst over the bank, leapt the stream, and came dashing across the field, followed by the huntsman. The hare tried to get through the fence. It was too thick, and she turned sharp around to make for the road, but it was too late. The dogs were upon her with their wild cries. We heard one shriek, and that was the end of her. All the gentlemen seemed well pleased. As for me, I was so astonished that I did not first see what was going on by the brook, but when I did look, there was a sad sight. 2 fine horses were down. One was struggling in the stream, and the other was groaning on the grass. One of the riders was getting out of the water covered in mud, and the other lay quite still. "His neck is broken," said my mother. There was no noise now. Even the dogs were quiet and seemed to know that something was wrong. They carried him to my master's house. I heard afterward that it was young George Gordon, the squire's only son, a fine, tall young man, and the pride of his family. Mr. Bond, the horse doctor, came to look at the black horse that lay groaning on the grass. He felt him all over and shook his head. One of the horse's legs was broken. Then someone ran to our master's house and came back with a gun. Presently there was a loud bang and a dreadful shriek, and then all was still. The black horse moved no more. My mother seemed much troubled. She never would go to that part of the field afterwards. Not many days later, they carried young Gordon to the churchyard to bury him. What they did with the black horse I never knew, but it was all for one poor little hare. Chapter 2. My breaking in. I was now beginning to grow handsome. My coat had grown fine and soft and was bright black. I had one white foot and a pretty white star on my forehead. When I was 4 years old, Squire Gordon came to look at me. He examined my eyes, my mouth, and my legs. He seemed to like me and said, "When he has been well broken in, he will do very well." My master said he would break me in himself, as he did not want me to be frightened or hurt. And the next day he began. Everyone may not know what breaking in is. It means to teach a horse to wear a saddle and to bridle and to carry on his back a man, woman, or child, to go just the way that they wish and to go quietly. He must always do his master's will, even though he may be very tired or hungry. But the worst of it all is, once his harness is on, he may neither jump for joy nor lie down for weariness. So you see, this breaking in is a big step in training a horse. At first, I hated it and never felt more like kicking. But, of course, I could not kick. Such a good master. At last, one morning, my master got on my back and rode me around the meadow on the soft grass. It certainly did feel odd, but I must say I felt rather proud to carry my master, and as he continued to ride me a little every day, I soon became accustomed to it, and in time could do my work as well as my mother. Early in May, a man came from Squire Gordon's. He took me away to the hall. My master said, "Goodbye, Be a good horse, and always do your best." I could not say goodbye, so I put my nose into his hand. He patted me gently, and I left my first home. Squire Gordon's park was near a village of Birtwick, and was entered by a large iron gate. Then you trotted along on a smooth road between clumps of large old trees, which brought you to the house and the gardens. Beyond this lay the paddock, the old orchard, and the stables. The stable into which I was taken was very roomy, with 4 good stalls. The first stall was a large square one with a wooden gate. The 3 others were good stalls, but not nearly so large as this one. This was called a loose box, because the horse that was put into it was not tied up, but left loose, to do so as he liked. It is a great thing to have a loose box. The groom put me into this fine box. It was clean, sweet, and airy. I never was in a better box than that, and the sides were not too high for me to see all that went on through the iron rails at the top. He gave me some very nice oats, he patted me, spoke kindly, and then went away. When I had eaten my oats, I looked around. In the stall next to mine stood a little fat gray pony with a thick mane and tail, a very pretty head, and a pert little nose. I put my head up to the iron rails at the top of my box and said, "How do you do? What is your name?" He turned around, held up his head, and said, "My name is Merrylegs. I am very handsome. I carry the young ladies on my back, and sometimes I take out our mistress in the low cart. They think a great deal of me, and so does James. Are you going to live next door to me in the box?" I said, "Yes." "Well then," he said, "I hope you are good-tempered. I do not like anyone next door who bites." Just then a horse's head looked over from the stall beyond. The ears were laid back, and the eyes looked rather ill-tempered. This was a tall chestnut mare, with a long, handsome neck. She looked across at me and said, "So is it you who have turned me out of my box? It is a very strange thing for a colt like you to come and turn a lady out of her own home." "I beg your pardon," I said. "The man who brought me here put me here, and I had nothing to do with it. And as for me being a colt, I am 4 years old and a grown-up horse. I had never had words yet with horse or mare, and it is my wish to live at peace." "Well," she said, "we shall see. Of course, I do not want to have words with a young thing like you." In the afternoon, when she went out, Merrylegs told me all about it. "Ginger has a bad habit of biting and snapping. When she was in the loose box, she used to snap very much. One day she bit James in the arm and made it bleed, and so Miss Flora and Miss Jessie were afraid to come into the stable. They used to bring me nice things to eat, an apple or a carrot or a piece of bread, and I miss them very much. I hope they will now come again, if you do not bite or snap," he finished. I told him I never bit anything but grass, hay, and corn, and could not think what pleasure Ginger found in it. "Well, I don't think she does find pleasure," Merrylegs said. "It is just a bad habit. She says no one was ever kind to her, and why should she not bite? I'm sure, if all she says is true, she must have been very badly used before she came here. But John and James do all they can to please her, and our master never uses a whip if a horse acts right. So I think it is all Ginger's fault that she did not stay in that box." Next chapter. Birtwick Park. The next morning, John Manley, the coachman, took me into the yard and gave me a good grooming until my coat was soft and bright. After breakfast, he came and fitted me with a saddle and bridle, and then he rode me, first slowly, then a trot, then a canter, and when we were on the common he gave me a light touch with his whip, and we had a splendid gallop. "Ho, ho, my boy," he said as he pulled me up. "You would like to follow the hounds, I think." The next day I was brought up for my master. I tried to do exactly what he wanted me to do. I found that he was a very fine rider, and thoughtful of his horse, too. When we came home, the lady was at the hall door as he rode up. "Well, my dear," she said, "how do you like him?" "A more pleasant creature I never wish to mount," the squire replied. "What shall we call him?" "Would you like Ebony?" said she. "He is black as ebony." "No, not Ebony." "Will you call him Blackbird, like your uncle's old horse?" "No, he is far more handsome than old Blackbird ever was." "Yes," she said, "he really is a beauty, and he has such a sweet, good-tempered face, and such a fine, intelligent eye. What do you say to calling him Black Beauty?" Black Beauty, why, yes, I think that's a very good name. If you like, it shall be his name. And so it was. John the coachman seemed very proud of me. He used to make my mane and tail almost as smooth as a lady's hair, and he would talk to me a great deal. Of course, I did not understand all he said, but I learned what he wanted me to do. I grew very fond of him. A few days after this, I had to go out with Ginger in the carriage. I wonder how we would get on together, but except for laying her ears back when I was led up to her, she behaved very well. She did her work honestly and did her full share, and I never wished to have a better partner in double harness. As for Merrylegs, he and I soon became good friends. He was such a cheerful, plucky, good-tempered little fellow that he was a favorite with everyone, especially with Miss Jessie and Miss Flora, who used to ride along him in the orchard and have fine games with him and their little dog Frisky. On fine Sundays in the summertime, Ginger and I were turned out into the old orchard. The grass was so cool and soft to our feet, and the air so sweet, and the freedom to do as we liked was so pleasant. To gallop, to lie down, and to roll over on our backs, or to nibble the sweet grass. One day, when Ginger and I were standing alone in the shade, we talked for a long time. She wanted to know all about my bringing up and breaking in, and I told her. "Well," she said, "if I had your bringing up, I might have had a good temper as you, but now I don't believe I ever shall." "Why not?" I asked. "Because it has all been so different with me," she replied. "I never had anyone, horse or man, that was kind to me, or that I cared to please. In the first place, I was taken from my mother as soon as I was weaned. There was no kind master to look after me like yours, and talk to me and bring me nice things to eat. The man that had care of us never gave me a kind word in my life. Everything he did was rough, and I began to hate him. He wanted to make me afraid of him, but I was too high-mettled for that. And one day, when he had aggravated me more than usual, I bit him. So, of course, I was sold." "The next place," Ginger went on, "was old enough to drive one mad. I began to plunge and kick with all my might. I soon broke a lot of harness and kicked myself clear, so that was the end of that place. I came here not long before you did," she added, "but I had then made up my mind that men were my natural enemies, and that I must defend myself. Of course, it is very different here, but who knows how long it'll last." "Well," I said, "I think it would be a real shame if you were to bite or kick John or James." "I don't mean to," she said. "Well, they are good to me. I did bite James once pretty sharply, but John said, 'Try her with kindness.' And instead of punishing me as I expected, James came to me with his arm bound up and brought me a bran mash and stroked me. And I have never snapped at him since, and I won't either." Next chapter. A stormy day. One day late in autumn, my master had to go on a long journey. I was put in the dog cart, and John went too. There had been a great deal of rain, and now the wind was very high, and blew the dry leaves across the road in a shower. We went along merrily till we came to the toll bar and the low wooden bridge. The man at the gate said the river was rising fast, and he feared it would be a bad night. Many of the meadows were under water, and in one low part of the road, the water was halfway up to my knees. When we got to the town, the master's business kept him a long time, and we did not start for home till late in the afternoon. The wind was much higher, and I heard the master say to John that he had never been out in such a bad storm. We went along the edge of a wood, where the great branches were swaying like twigs, and the rushing sound was terrible. "It would be most unfortunate," said the master, "if one of these branches came down upon us." The words were scarcely out of his mouth when there was a groan, a crack, and a splitting sound. Crashing and tearing down among the other trees came an oak, torn up by the roots, and it fell right across the road just before us. I will never say I was not frightened, for I was. I stopped still, and I believe I trembled. Of course, I did not turn around or run away. I was not brought up to do that. John jumped out, and in a moment he was at my head. "That was very close," said my master. "What's to be done now?" "Well, sir, we can't drive over that tree nor yet get around it. There's nothing to do but go back to the 4 crossways, and that will be a good 6 miles before we get to the wooden bridge again. It will make us late, but the horse is fresh." So back we went and round by the crossroads. But by the time we got to the bridge, it was nearly very dark. We could see that just the water was over the bridge. We could just see that the water was over the middle of it. The moment my feet touched the first part of the bridge, I felt sure that there was something wrong. I dared not go forward, but I came to a dead stop. "Go on, Beauty," said my master, and he gave me a touch with the whip. I jumped, but I dared not go forward. "There's something wrong, sir?" said John, and he sprang out of the dog-cart and came to my head and looked all about. He tried to lead me forward. "Come on, Beauty, what's the matter?" Of course, I could not tell him, but I knew very well that the bridge was not safe. Just then, the man at the toll gate on the other side ran out of the house, swinging a lantern. "Hello, stop," he cried. "What's the matter?" shouted my master. "The bridge is broken in the middle, and part of it was carried away. If you come on, you'll be into the river." "Thank God," said my master. "You beauty," said John, and he took the bridle and gently turned me round to the right-hand road by the riverside. The wind seemed to have lulled after that furious blast that tore up the tree. It grew darker and darker, and very still. I trotted quietly along, the wheels hardly making a sound on the soft road. At last we came to the park gates, and found the gardener looking out for us. He said that my mistress had been greatly worried ever since dark, fearing some accident had happened. We saw a light at the hall door, and as we came up, she ran out, saying, "Are you really safe, my dear? Oh, I've been so anxious, imagining all sorts of things. You haven't had an accident?" "No, my dear, but if your Black Beauty had not been wiser than we were, we would have all been carried down the river at the wooden bridge." I heard no more as they went into the house, and John took me to the stable. Oh, what a good supper he gave me that night! A good bran mash and some crushed beans with my oats, and such a thick bed of straw. I was glad of it. And so I was tired. Next chapter, The Fire. One morning early in December, James was just coming in from the corn chamber with some oats when the master came into the stable. He looked very serious and held an open letter in his hand. John touched his cap and waited for orders. "Good morning, John," said the master. "I have a letter from Sir Clifford Williams. He wants me to find him a trustworthy young groom, about 20 or 21 years old, who knows his business. If James could get the job, it would be a good start for him. How old are you, James?" "I'll be 19 next May, sir." "That's young. What do you think, John?" "Well, sir, it is young, but he is as steady as a man, and is strong and well grown, and though he has not had much experience in driving, he has a light, firm hand and a quick eye, and he is very careful." A few days after this conversation, it was decided that James would go to Clifford Hall in a month. In the meantime, he was to get all the practice in driving that could be given to him. Ginger and I were put into the carriage, and James drove us. At first, John rode with him on the box, telling him this and that, and then James drove along. and then James drove alone. Not long after this, my master and mistress decided to visit some friends about 46 miles away, and James was to drive them. The first day we traveled 32 miles, and there were some long, heavy hills, but James drove so carefully and thoughtfully that we were not at all distressed. We stopped once or twice on the road, and just as the sun was going down, we reached the town where we were to spend the night. We stopped at the biggest hotel and drove into a long yard, at the farther end of which were the stables. 2 hostlers came to take us out. The head hostler unbuckled my harness and led me to a long stable with 2 or 3 horses in it. The other man brought Ginger. James stood by a while. We were rubbed down and cleaned. Then, after, Ginger and I had our corn. James and the head hostler left the stable together. Later on in the evening, a young man with a pipe in his mouth stopped in at the stable to gossip with the under hostler. "Just run up the ladder into the loft, will you, Toller?" the hostler said, "and put some hay into this horse's rack. Only put down your pipe." "All right," said the other, and went up through the trap door. James came in later to look at us the last thing, and then the door was locked. I cannot say how long I slept, but I woke up very uncomfortable, though I hardly knew why. I got up. The air seemed all thick and choking. I heard Ginger coughing, and one of the other horses moved about restlessly. It was quite dark, and I could see nothing, but the stable was full of smoke, which seemed to be coming from the open trap door. I heard a soft, rushing sort of noise, and a low crackling and snapping, so strange that it made me tremble all over. At last, I heard steps outside, and the under hostler burst into the stable with a lantern and tried to untie the horses and lead them out. But he seemed so frightened himself that he frightened us still more. None of us would go with him. He tried to drag each one of us out by force. Of course, that was no use. Then he ran out of the stable. No doubt we were very foolish, but danger seemed to be all around, and there was nobody we knew to trust, and all was strange and uncertain. The rushing sound grew louder, and as I looked up through the bars of my empty rack, I saw a red light flickering on the wall. Then I heard a cry of "Fire!" and the head hostler quietly and quickly came in. He got one horse out and then another, and all the while the flames were playing round the trapdoor, and the roaring overhead was dreadful. The next thing I heard was James' voice, quiet and cheery, as it always was. "Come, my beauties, it is time for us to be off, so wake up and come along." I stood nearest to the door, so he came to me first, patting me as he came in. "Come, Beauty, on with your bridle, my boy. We'll soon be out of this smother." It was on in no time. He then took the scarf off his neck and tied it lightly over my eyes, patting and coaxing. He led me out of the stable. Safe in the yard, he slipped the scarf off my eyes and shouted, "Here, somebody, take this horse while I go back for the other." A tall man stepped forward and took me, and James darted back into the stable. I set up a shrill whinny as I saw him go. There was much confusion in the yard, but I kept my eyes fixed on the stable door, where the smoke poured out thicker than ever, and I could see flashes of red light. Presently I heard a loud, clear voice, which I knew was the master's. "James Howard! James! Are you there?" There was no answer, but I heard a crash inside the stable, and the next moment I gave a loud, joyful neigh, for I saw James coming through the smoke, leading Ginger after him. "My brave lad," said master, laying his hand on my shoulder. "Are you hurt?" James shook his head, for he could not yet speak. "Aye," said the big man who held me. "He is a brave lad, and no mistake about it." There came a sound of galloping feet and loud rumbling wheels. "'Tis the fire engine! The fire engine!" shouted 2 or 3 voices. "Stand back! Make way!" And clattering and thundering over over the stones, 2 horses dashed into the yard with the heavy engine behind them. The firemen leapt to the ground. There was no need to ask where the fire was. It was leaping up in a great blaze from the roof. As soon as James and Ginger had gotten their breaths back, Master led us out into the broad, quiet marketplace. The stars were shining, and, except for the noise behind us, all was still. Master took us to a large hotel on the other side. As soon as the hostler came for us, Master said, "James, I must now hasten to your mistress. I trust the horses entirely to you. Order whatever you think is needed." And with that, he was gone. The next morning, as the hostler was rubbing me down, I heard him tell James that the fire had been started by the young man named Toller. He had gone up the ladder to put down some hay, but had not laid aside his pipe first, as the under-hostler had asked him to do. I remember our John Manny's rule, never to allow a pipe in the stable, and thought it ought to be the rule everywhere. Master came in then to see how we were and to speak to James. I did not hear much, but I could see that James looked very happy, and I thought the master was very proud of him. Next chapter, Going for the Doctor. We returned home about a week later, and we were glad to be in our own stable again. John was equally glad to see us. Before he and James left us for the night, James said, "I wonder who is coming in my place." "Little Joe Green," said John. "Little Joe Green? Why, he's a child." "He's 14 and a half, said John. "But he's such a little chap." "Yes, he is small, but he is quick and willing and kind-hearted, too, so I said I was willing to try him." "It'll make you a lot of extra work, John," said James. "Well," said John with a laugh, "work and I are very good friends. I was never afraid of work yet." "You are a very good man," said James. "I wish I may ever be like you." The next day, Joe came to the stables to learn all he could before James left. Joe was a nice, bright young fellow, and always came whistling to his work. James taught him upon Merrylegs, and Merrylegs was a good deal put out first to be mulled about, as he said, by a boy who knows nothing. But toward the end of the second week, he told me confidentially that he thought the boy would turn out well. At last the day came when James had to leave us. Everyone was sorry to lose him. As for Merrylegs, he pined after him for several days, and went quite off his appetite. So John took him out several mornings with a leading rein when he exercised me. Trotting and galloping by my side got the little fellow's spirits up again, and he was soon all right. One night, a few days after James had left, I had eaten my hay and was lying down in the straw fast asleep, when I was suddenly wakened by the stable bell ringing very loudly. I heard John running up the hall. He was back in no time, calling out, "Wake up, Beauty! You must go well now, if ever you did." Almost before I could think, I had my saddle and bridle on, and took me at a quick trot up the hall door. The squire stood there with a lamp in his hand. "Now, John," he said, "ride for your life, that is, for your mistress' life. There is not a moment to lose. Give this note to Dr. White. Give Beauty a rest at the inn and be back as soon as you can." John said, "Yes, sir," and was on my back in a minute. The gardener who lived at the lodge had heard the bell ring and was ready with the gate open, and away we went through the park and through the village and down the hill. There was before us a long piece of level road by the riverside. John said to me, "Now, Beauty, do your best." And so I did. I needed no whip nor spur, and for 2 miles I galloped as fast as I could lay my feet to the ground. When we came to the bridge, John pulled me up a little and patted my neck. "Well done, Beauty, good old fellow," he said. He would have never let me go slower. He would have let me go slower, but my spirit was up, and I was off again as fast as before. We came through a dark wood, then uphill, then downhill, till after an 8-mile run we came to the town. It was all quite still except the clatter of my feet on the stones. The church clock struck 3 as we drew up to Dr. White's door. John knocked at the door like thunder. A window was thrown up, and Dr. White put his head out. "Miss Gordon is very ill, sir," said John. "Master wants you to go there. He thinks she will die if you cannot get there. Here is a note." "Wait," the doctor said. "I will come at once." He shut the door and was soon at the door. He shut the window and was soon at the door. "The worst of it is," he said, "that my horse has been out all day and is worn out. What's to be done? Can I have your horse?" "He has come at a gallop near it all the way here, sir, and I was to give him a rest here, but I think my master would not be against it if you think fit, sir." "All right," he said. "I will soon be ready." John stood by me and stroked my neck. I was very hot. The doctor came out with his riding whip. "You will not need that, sir," said John. "Black Beauty will go till he drops. Take care of him, sir." In a minute we had left John far behind. I did my best, and when we came to the hill, the doctor drew me up. "Now, my good fellow," he said, "take some breath." I was glad he did, for I was nearly spent, but that breathing helped me on, and soon we were in the park. Joe was at the lodge gate. My master was at the hall door, for he had heard us coming. He spoke not a word. The doctor went into the house with him, and Joe led me to the stable. I was glad to get home, for my legs shook under me, and I could only stand and pant. Poor Joe. He was young and small, and yet he knew very little. He rubbed my legs and my chest, but he did not put my warm cloth on me. He thought I was so hot I would not like it. Then he gave me a pail full of water to drink. It was cold and very good. I drank it all. Then he gave me some hay and some corn, and thinking he had done right, he went away. Soon I began to shake and tremble, and turn deadly cold. My legs ached, my loins ached, and my chest ached, and I felt sore all over. Oh, how I wished for my warm, thick cloth. As I stood and trembled, I wished for John, but he had 8 miles to walk, and so I lay down on my straw and tried to go to sleep. After a long while I heard John at the door. I gave a low moan, for I was in great pain. He was at my side in a moment, stooping down by me. I could not tell him how I felt, but he seemed to know it all. He covered me up with 3 warm cloths, and then ran to the house for warm water. He made me some hot gruel, which I drank, and then I think I went to sleep. John seemed to be put out. I heard him say to himself over and over again, stupid boy, no cloth put on, and I dare say the water was cold too. Boys are no good." But Joe was a good boy after all. I was now very ill. I could not draw my breath without pain. John nursed me day and night. My master, too, often came to see me. "My poor Beauty," he said one day, "my good horse, you saved your mistress' life." I was very glad to hear that, for it seems the doctor said if we'd been a little longer, it would have been too late. John told my master he never saw a horse go so fast in his life. It seems as if the horse knew what was the matter. Of course, I did, though John thought not, at least. I knew that John and I must go at the top of our speed, and that it was for the sake of the mistress. I do not know how long I was ill. Mr. Bond, the horse doctor, came every day. One day he bled me, and I felt very faint, and I thought I would die. I believe they all thought so too. One night John had to give me some medicine, and Thomas Green came in to help him. I heard Tom Green say in a low voice, "I wish, John, you'd say a bit of kind word to Joe. The boy is quite broken-hearted. He says if Beauty dies, it will have been all his fault. It goes to my heart to hear him. I think you might give him just a word. He is not a bad boy." John said slowly, "You must not be too hard on me. I know Joe meant no harm. I never said he did. I know he is not a bad boy, but you see, that horse is the pride of my heart, and to think that his life may be flung away in this manner is more than I can bear. But if you think I am hard on the boy, I will try to give him a good word tomorrow. That is, if Beauty is better. I heard no more of this conversation, for the medicine did well and sent me to sleep, and in the morning I felt much better. Next chapter, The Parting. I had now lived in Birtwick 3 happy years, but sad changes were about to come over us. We heard from time to time that our mistress was ill. The doctor was often at the house, and the master looked grave and anxious. Then we heard that she must leave her home at once, and go to a warm country for 2 or 3 years. The news fell upon the household like the tolling of a death bell. The master began at once to make arrangements for breaking up his home and leaving England. John went about his work silent and sad, and Joe scarcely whistled. The first to go were Miss Jessie and Miss Flora, with their governess. They came to bid us good-bye. They hugged Merrylegs like an old friend, and so he was. Then we heard what had been arranged for us. Master had sold Ginger and me off to his friend, the Earl of W., for he thought we would have a good place there. He had given Merrylegs to the Vicar, who wanted a pony for his Miss Blomefield and the children, but it was on condition that Merrylegs never be sold. Joe was engaged to take care of him and to help in the house, and so I thought Merrylegs was well off. John had offers of several good jobs, but he decided to wait a little and look around. The evening before they left, the master came into the stable to give his horses a last pat. He seemed very low-spirited. I knew that by his voice. I believe we horses can tell more by the voice than many men can. Then Master thanked John for his long and faithful service, but that was too much for John. "Please don't, sir," he said. "I can't bear it. We shall never forget you, sir, and God willing, we may some day see Mistress back again like herself." Master gave John his hand, but he did not speak, and they both left the stable. The last sad day had come. The footman and the heavy luggage had gone off the day before. There was only Master and Mistress and her maid. Ginger and I brought the carriage up to the door for the last time. Master came down the steps with the mistress and placed her carefully in the carriage. I was on the side next to the house and could see all that went on. "Goodbye again," he said to the house servants who stood around. "We shall not forget any of you." He got in too and said, "Drive on, John." Joe jumped in, and we trotted slowly through the park and the village. When we reached the railway station, I heard Mistress say in her own sweet voice, "Goodbye, John. God bless you." I felt the rein twitch, but John made no answer. Perhaps he could not speak. Poor Joe. He came and stood close to our heads to hide his tears. Very soon the train came puffing into the station. In 2 or 3 minutes the doors were slammed, the guard whistled, and the train glided away in a cloud of white smoke. When it was quite out of sight, John took the reins, mounted the box, and with Joe drove slowly home. But it was not our home now. The next morning after breakfast, Joe harnessed Merrylegs to take him to the vicarage, and he came first and said goodbye to us, and Merrylegs neighed to us from the yard. Then John put the saddle on Ginger and the leading rein on me, and rode us across country to Earlshall Park, where the Earl of W. lived. There was a very fine house and large stables. We went into the yard through a stone gateway, and John asked for Mr. York, the coachman. He was a fine-looking man, and his voice said at once that he expected to be obeyed. he called a groom to take us to the boxes and invited John to take some refreshment. We were taken to a light, airy stable and placed in boxes adjoining each other. Then we were rubbed down and fed. In about half an hour, John and Mr. York came in to see us. "Now, Mr. Manley," he said, after carefully looking us over, "we all know that horses have their peculiarities, and as well as men. Is there anything particular about either of these that you would like to mention?" I had better mention that we had never used the bearing rein with either one of them. The black horse never had one on, and the dealer said it was the gag bit that spoiled the other one's temper. "Well," said Mr. York, "if they come here they must wear the bearing rein. I prefer a loose rein myself, and his lordship is always very reasonable about horses. But my lady, that's another thing. She will have style. If her carriage horses are not reined up tight, she wouldn't look at them. I always stand out against the gag bit, and shall do so, but it must be tight up when my lady rides." "I am sorry for it, very sorry," said John, "but I must go now, or I shall miss the train." He came round to each of us to pat and speak to us for the last time. His voice sounded very sad. I held my face close to him, and that's all I could do to say goodbye. Then he was gone, and I have never seen him since. Thank you for listening. Part 2 will be coming soon. Have a great day.